The Grand Council chamber of the Zitharian Empire gleamed with the cold light of 1,000 stars reflected through crystalline walls. Admiral Krethzar stood at the center of the circular room, his 4 eyes scanning the holographic reports that floated before him like ghosts. Around him sat the 12 members of the High Command, each one a veteran of countless conquests across 3,000 years of galactic domination. The Zitharian Empire had crushed over 200 species under its iron rule, and today they were discussing reports from the Outer Rim territories that spoke of yet another failure by their colonial governors. The reports were embarrassing. 3 patrol ships had been destroyed in Sector 447, and the local commander was blaming it on something the Admiral found absolutely ridiculous. Krethzar's mandibles clicked together in what his species used as laughter, and the sound echoed through the chamber like stones grinding against each other. He gestured with one of his 4 arms toward the floating data, and his voice came out harsh and mocking as he addressed the council members who were watching him with their own versions of amusement. The word that kept appearing in the report was one that Krethzar had heard before, always in the context of excuses and legends. Humans. The mythical warriors that supposedly existed somewhere in the unexplored regions of space. According to the stories that circulated through bars and trading posts across the galaxy, humans were a species that refused to surrender no matter the odds. They were said to be stubborn beyond reason, creative in warfare, and so fiercely protective of their freedom that they would choose death over subjugation. But in 3,000 years of Zitharian expansion, not one single piece of evidence had ever been found to prove humans actually existed. Sub-Commander Veln rose from her seat, her scaled body reflecting the light in patterns of silver and blue. She was known throughout the fleet for her brutal efficiency in crushing rebellions, and her voice dripped with contempt as she spoke about the human legend. According to Veln, humans were nothing more than a convenient excuse that weak commanders used when they failed in their duties. When a battle was lost due to poor planning, blame the humans. When ships were destroyed because of incompetent tactics, claim humans did it. The legend persisted because it was useful, not because it was true. Krethzar agreed completely. The Zitharians had faced real challenges before and overcome them all. They had broken the Krell, a species of massive warriors whose berserker rage made them nearly unstoppable in close combat. They had defeated the Sindathi hive mind, billions of beings who could coordinate their actions with perfect precision. They had even subjugated the Vosh, creatures made of pure energy who could pass through solid matter and manipulate electromagnetic fields. If species like those had fallen to Zitharian might, what possible threat could one more organic species pose, assuming they even existed at all? The discussion in the council chamber continued for another hour. Various commanders presented their theories about what had really happened in Sector 447. Perhaps the patrol ships had encountered a previously unknown spatial anomaly. Maybe there was a rebel faction using stolen Zitharian technology. Some suggested that the Talarians, a minor species in that region, had somehow acquired advanced weapons. But the conclusion was always the same. Humans were not real, and any reports claiming otherwise were the result of incompetence or deception. Admiral Krethzar made his decision with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. He would personally lead a small task force to Sector 447 and crush whatever rebellion was festering there. Then he would execute the commander who had dared to file reports blaming mythical creatures for his failures. The other council members voiced their approval, already dismissing the matter as resolved. After all, the Zitharian Empire had never lost a war in its 3,000-year history, and it certainly was not going to start losing to beings that did not exist. As the council session ended and the various commanders departed to their ships and duties, Krethzar remained in the chamber for a moment longer. He looked out through the transparent walls at the fleet assembled around the capital world. Thousands of warships hung in the void like crimson jewels, each one a testament to Zitharian supremacy. The Empire stretched across a third of the known galaxy, and every species within its borders had learned the same lesson. Resistance was futile, rebellion was suicide, and freedom was a dream that died when the Zitharian warships arrived. The Admiral allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before turning to leave. He had fought in dozens of campaigns during his long career, and he had seen countless species kneel before the Empire. Some fought bravely at first, but they all fell eventually. The pattern was always the same. Initial resistance, followed by crushing defeat, followed by occupation and integration into the Empire. Within a generation or two, the conquered species would forget they had ever been free. Their children would grow up as citizens of the Empire, loyal and obedient, never knowing any other way of life. That was the true genius of the Zetharian system. They did not just conquer worlds, but erase the very memory of independence. History was rewritten, cultures were absorbed, and resistance became not just futile, but unthinkable. The Empire had perfected this process over millennia, and it had never failed. Not once. The idea that some legendary species could challenge this perfect machine was laughable. Krethzar walked through the corridors of the command station toward his personal transport. His staff fell in behind him, carrying data pads and tactical reports. They were already preparing for the expedition to Sector 447, calculating travel times and fleet compositions. The Admiral was taking this seriously enough to lead the mission personally, but not seriously enough to bring a truly large force. 20 warships would be more than sufficient to handle whatever was actually causing trouble out there. As his transport lifted away from the command station and headed toward his flagship, Krethzar looked back at the glittering capital world below. The Empire was eternal. The Empire was unstoppable. And humans, if they existed at all, would learn that lesson just like everyone else had. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in amusement one more time as he imagined the looks on the faces of his fellow commanders when he returned with proof that the human legend was nothing but smoke and shadows. He had no way of knowing that everything he believed was about to be shattered. The legends were real. Humans existed, and they were nothing like anything the Zetharian Empire had ever faced before. The bridge of the USS Defiance hummed with the quiet efficiency that came from a crew who had served together for 3 years. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair, reviewing patrol reports on his datapad while his officers monitored their respective stations. The ship was old by human standards, built 30 years ago during the expansion era when humanity had first begun spreading beyond their home system. Her hull bore the scars of a dozen encounters with pirates and raiders, but her engines were reliable, and her weapon systems were well maintained by a crew who took pride in their work. Jake was tired. They had been on patrol for 3 months, protecting the scattered human colonies on the galactic frontier. Most days were routine, checking in with remote outposts and escorting supply convoys. But Jake knew better than to let his guard down. Space was dangerous, and there were plenty of hostile forces that would happily prey on isolated human settlements if given the chance. His job was to make sure that never happened. Lieutenant Amy Grant sat at the communications station, her headset pressed to one ear as she monitored the various channels. She was young but competent, and Jake trusted her to catch anything important. So when she suddenly straightened in her chair and turned to face him with wide eyes, he was already reaching for the tactical display before she even spoke. Her voice was tight with urgency as she announced that they were receiving a distress signal from Outpost Kestrel, a Talarian colony about 2 hours away at maximum speed. The Talarians were one of the few alien species that humans had developed friendly relations with. They were peaceful traders who had warned humanity about the dangers lurking in the deeper regions of space, including the Zetharian Empire. Jake had visited Kestrel once before and remembered the Talarian families who lived there, raising their children in hopes of a peaceful future. The message Amy was now playing through the bridge speakers made his blood run cold. The Talarians were under attack by Zetharian forces and they were begging for help. Jake did not hesitate. He ordered the helm to set course for Kestrel at maximum burn and told all hands to report to battle stations. Around him, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. Weapon systems came online, shields were charged, and damage control teams prepared for combat. The Defiance might be old, but her crew was ready. As the ship accelerated toward the crisis, Jake pulled up everything he could find about Zetharian tactics and capabilities. What he read was not encouraging. The Zetharian Empire had a reputation for overwhelming force. They did not negotiate, they did not show mercy, and they certainly did not retreat. Their technology was advanced, their ships were heavily armed, and their crews were trained to view combat as a matter of mathematical certainty. They calculated odds, followed doctrine, and expected victory because they had almost never known defeat. Jake looked at the tactical projection showing 4 Zetharian destroyers against his single frigate and knew that every regulation in the human fleet handbook said he should call for reinforcements and wait, but Waiting meant those Talarians would die. Jake had seen the aftermath of Zetharian attacks on other species. They did not take prisoners. They did not spare civilians. They simply erased any resistance and moved on. The captain made his decision knowing it might be the last one he ever made. They were going in. When the Defiance dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kestrel system, the scene was even worse than Jake had feared. The Talarian outpost was burning, its shields flickering under sustained bombardment from the 4 Zetharian destroyers. Escape pods were launching from the station, carrying civilians away from the destruction. But the Zetharian ships were systematically hunting them down and destroying them one by one. Amy whispered that they were killing civilians, and Jake felt rage rise in his chest like a physical force. Human history was full of moments like this. Moments when the right thing to do was also the suicidal thing to do. Moments when ordinary people had to choose between safety and honor. Jake thought about his grandfather, who had fought in Earth's last great war before humanity reached the stars. The old man had told him stories about being outnumbered and outgunned, but fighting anyway, because some things were worth dying for. As Jake gave the order to charge weapons in close-to-combat range, he understood exactly what his grandfather had meant. The Defiance screamed into the battle like an arrow loosed from a bow. Her railguns opened fire at maximum range, sending solid projectile rounds downrange at a fraction of light speed. The Zetharians had excellent energy shields designed to disperse laser and plasma fire, but they had never encountered kinetic weapons quite like human railguns. The first Zetharian destroyer took 3 rounds directly to its engineering section before it even registered that it was under attack. The shields did nothing to stop solid matter moving that fast, and the destroyer's reactor went critical in a brilliant flash that lit up the darkness. The other 3 Zetharian ships turned to face this new threat, but Jake had already anticipated their response. Human naval doctrine was built on lessons learned from centuries of warfare back on Earth. Attack fast, hit hard, and never stay still long enough for the enemy to target you effectively. The Defiance dove under the Zetharian formation, her point defense lasers shooting down incoming missiles, while her torpedo tubes launched a full spread at the second destroyer. 2 torpedoes got through the enemy point defense and detonated against the hull, blowing massive holes in the armor plating. The battle became a chaotic dance of death. The Defiance was smaller and faster than the Zetharian destroyers, and Jake used that advantage ruthlessly. He brought his ship in close, too close for the enemy's long-range weapons to track effectively. The Zetharians were used to fighting at distance, where their superior firepower could overwhelm opponents. They were not prepared for a human captain who was willing to fight at point-blank range, where one mistake meant instant death for everyone involved. The second Zetharian destroyer exploded when a lucky shot from the Defiance penetrated its magazine and detonated the stored munitions. The third destroyer managed to land several solid hits, and Jake felt his ship shudder as armor plating was torn away and internal systems failed. Damage reports flooded in from all sections. They had lost the port railgun, shields were down to 30%, and casualties were mounting. But they were still in the fight. Jake ordered all remaining power diverted to engines and weapons. If they were going to die here, they were going to take these Zetharian ships with them. The Defiance came around for another attack run, her remaining weapons blazing. The third Zetharian destroyer tried to turn and flee, but human torpedoes caught it in the stern and crippled its engines. The fourth destroyer finally broke off entirely and jumped to faster-than-light speed, abandoning its damaged companion. In the sudden silence that followed, Jake looked at his tactical display and could not quite believe what he was seeing. They had won. 1 human frigate against 4 Zetharian destroyers, and they had won. The price had been terrible. 70% of his crew was dead or wounded. His ship was barely holding together, and they would need months of repairs before the Defiance could fight again. But the Talarian civilians were safe, and the Zetharians had learned something important today. Humans were real. Humans could fight, and humans did not run when innocent people needed protecting. As medical teams worked to save the wounded and engineering crews patched the worst of the damage, Amy received a message from Outpost Kestrel. The Talarians were thanking them, praising their courage and asking how they could ever repay such a debt. Jake told her to send a simple reply. Tell them we are friends, and friends help each other. Several thousand light-years away, Admiral Krethzar received the first reports of the engagement. His mandibles stopped clicking in amusement, The word human appeared in his tactical database, no longer as a legend but as a confirmed threat. The Admiral stared at the data for a long time, his four eyes narrowing as he began to realize that perhaps the legends had been true after all. Admiral Krethzar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and felt something he had not experienced in his 50 years of military service. Uncertainty gnawed at him as he reviewed the tactical data from the Kestrel incident for the 100th time. 4 destroyers had engaged a single enemy frigate, and 3 had been destroyed while the 4th fled in disgrace. The commander of that 4th ship was already dead, executed for cowardice, but killing him did not change the uncomfortable truth. The humans were real and they were dangerous. The High Command had given Krethzar new orders. He was to take a full battle fleet to human space and make an example that would echo across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The Empire could not allow this challenge to stand. If other species learned that the Zetharians could be defeated, it would encourage rebellion everywhere. The Admiral commanded 30 warships now, everything from fast destroyers to massive battleships. It was enough firepower to level a planet, and he was bringing it all to bear on a single human colony. The target was Liberty Station, a mining colony on the edge of human territory. Intelligence reports indicated it had a population of about 50,000 humans and minimal military defenses. Krethzar planned to destroy the station completely, then broadcast images of the destruction throughout the sector. Any species thinking about resisting the Empire would see what happened to those who dared fight back. It would be a simple operation, over in a few hours, and then the Admiral could return to the capital, with proof that the human threat had been eliminated. Colonel Nathan Price sat in the command center deep inside Liberty Station and watched the Zetharian fleet approach on his tactical displays. He was an older man, his hair gray and his face lined with scars from the Outer Colonies War that had raged 30 years ago. Back then, different human factions had fought each other over resources and territory, and Nathan had learned hard lessons about warfare and survival. He had seen cities burn and watched good people die, and those experiences had shaped everything about how he viewed defense. Liberty Station had been built by colonists who remembered those wars. They had not come out to the frontier expecting peace and safety. They had come prepared for the worst, and they had built their station accordingly. What looked like a simple mining colony from orbit was actually a fortress. Hidden weapon batteries dotted the outer hull, missile silos were concealed in the asteroid field surrounding the station, and the central habitat was protected by armor plating, thick enough to withstand sustained bombardment. Nathan had spent years drilling the colonists on emergency procedures, and now that training was about to be tested, the colonel opened the station-wide communication channel and spoke in a calm voice that betrayed none of the tension he felt. He told the civilians to evacuate to the inner shelters, reminded the defense crews to stay at their stations, and assured everyone that they had prepared for this day. Liberty Station would not fall easily. As he closed the channel, his second-in-command asked if they should request help from the fleet. Nathan shook his head. The nearest human warships were days away, and the Zetharians would not wait that long. They were on their own. When the Zetharian fleet entered weapons range, Admiral Krethzar expected the humans to surrender immediately. Instead, Liberty Station opened fire. Missiles erupted from concealed launchers by the hundreds, streaking toward the Zetharian formation in waves. Mass drivers fired solid slugs the size of small cars at velocities that made them as destructive as tactical nuclear weapons. Laser arrays designed for mining asteroids pivoted to focus on Zetharian shields, pumping incredible amounts of energy into them until they overloaded and failed. Krethzar watched in shock as his lead destroyers took massive damage in the opening seconds of the battle. This was not supposed to happen. Intelligence had said minimal defenses. Intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. The Admiral barked orders, trying to maintain formation while his ship scattered to avoid the incoming fire. 2 destroyers were already drifting, their reactors offline and their crews dead or dying. A cruiser took a direct hit from a mass driver round that punched completely through the ship from bow to stern. Nathan watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. They were hurting the Zetharians badly, but he knew it could not last. The station had impressive firepower, but the enemy fleet was simply too large. Already the Zetharians were adapting, spreading out and focusing their return fire on the weapon emplacements. One by one, the outer batteries were being destroyed. The missile silos were running low on ammunition. In another 10 minutes, the station's defenses would be exhausted, and then the real killing would begin. That was when Captain Lisa Chen arrived with the relief fleet. She had been on patrol 3 systems away when she received Nathan's distress call, and she had pushed her ships to their absolute limits getting here in time. 12 human destroyers dropped out of faster-than-light travel right on top of the Zytharian formation, and their sudden appearance threw the enemy fleet into chaos. Lisa did not bother with fancy tactics or careful maneuvering. She simply ordered all ships to attack at point-blank range and make every shot count. The battle became a brutal close-range brawl. Human ships darted between the larger Zytharian vessels, firing torpedoes and railguns at targets so close they could not miss. The Zytharians tried to bring their superior firepower to bear, but in such close quarters their size became a disadvantage. They risked hitting their own ships if they fired without careful aim, while the humans had no such concerns. Every human weapon was fired at maximum rate, pouring destruction into the enemy fleet faster than their shields could regenerate. Admiral Krethazar realized with growing horror that he was losing. The concept was so foreign to him that he struggled to process it. The Zytharian Empire did not lose battles. They did not retreat. They conquered or they died trying. But his ships were being torn apart by an enemy that fought with a ferocity he had never encountered. These humans did not just want to win. They wanted to make the Zytharians suffer for daring to threaten their home. The USS Valiant took catastrophic damage from a Zytharian battleship. Her hull breached in a dozen places and her reactor approaching critical failure. Her captain, a young man named Greg Turner, could have ordered his crew to abandon ship. Instead, he aimed his dying vessel at the battleship and pushed the engines to maximum. The Valiant rammed the much larger Zytharian ship at full speed, both vessels exploding in a fireball that consumed 2 more nearby ships in the blast. The USS Ranger lost all power when her reactor was hit, leaving her drifting helplessly in space. But her captain, a woman named Claire Hudson, was not done fighting. She ordered the crew to manually load and fire the torpedo tubes, then set the reactor to overload. When Zytharian boarding teams tried to capture the crippled ship, the reactor detonated with the force of a small star, taking 3 Zytharian cruisers with it. Claire and her crew died instantly, but they took hundreds of enemy soldiers with them. The USS Phoenix fought on with 3 engines destroyed and no shields, her captain refusing to retreat even when ordered to do so. The ship was hit again and again, atmosphere venting from dozens of hull breaches, but still she fired every weapon that would still function. Her crew worked in vacuum, their emergency suits keeping them alive as they loaded torpedoes by hand and aimed damaged railguns manually. When the Phoenix finally lost all power and began to drift, she had destroyed 2 Zytharian destroyers and damaged a battleship so severely it had to withdraw. Admiral Krethazar made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered a retreat. The surviving Zytharian ships turned and fled, jumping to faster than light speed as quickly as their damaged systems would allow. Behind them, they left the wreckage of 14 warships and thousands of dead crew members. The mighty Zytharian Empire, undefeated in 3,000 years, had been driven off by a mining colony and a dozen human destroyers. On Liberty Station, Nathan Price stood amid the cheering civilians and felt exhausted. They had won, but the cost had been terrible. 3 of Lisa's destroyers had been completely destroyed, and the others were barely functional. The station itself would need months of repairs. But they had proven something important today. Humans could fight the Zytharians and win. Word of this battle would spread, and the galaxy would never be the same. The news of Liberty Station spread through the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. On 1,000 worlds under Zytharian occupation, people whispered the story in secret. A human colony had fought off the Empire's fleet. The invincible Zytharians had retreated. For species that had known only defeat and subjugation for generations, these whispers carried something precious and dangerous. They carried hope. Fleet Admiral Curtis Blake stood in his office on the newly fortified command station, orbiting New Terra, and read through diplomatic messages that had been flooding in for the past 2 weeks. The Talarians wanted to thank humanity formally for saving Outpost Kestrel. The Sindathi hive mind was requesting a meeting. Even the Krell, who were known for their hatred of all other species, had sent a message expressing interest in talking. Curtis was a career military officer, comfortable with fleet tactics and strategic planning. But diplomacy was something entirely different. He was still reading when his aide announced a visitor. Ambassador Vorin of the Talarian people had arrived and was requesting an audience. Curtis told his aide to send the ambassador in, then stood and smoothed his uniform. Vorin entered the office slowly, his elderly body moving with the careful dignity of someone who had lived through much suffering. The Talarian ambassador was old by any standard. His scaled skin faded to a pale gray, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. Vorin spoke through a translator device that rendered his words in clear English. He thanked Curtis for seeing him, then got directly to the point. The Talarians had watched the Zitharian Empire conquer world after world for 3 generations. They had seen species stronger and more advanced than themselves fall under imperial rule. But they had never seen anyone make the Zitharians bleed the way humans had. Vorin paused, then asked the question that had brought him across the stars. Were the legends true? Did humans really refuse to kneel? Did they fight not just for survival, but for principle? Curtis thought about how to answer. He could have given a diplomatic response, something carefully worded and politically safe. Instead, he simply said yes. Humans fought for principle. They fought for freedom, and they did not abandon their friends or allies no matter the cost. Vorin was silent for a long moment, and Curtis thought he saw moisture gathering in the old ambassador's eyes. Then Vorin said the words that would change everything. The Talarians wanted to fight beside humanity. They wanted to join the resistance against the Empire. Within weeks, other species began to arrive. The Krell sent a delegation of their greatest, warriors, beings who stood 3 meters tall and could tear steel with their bare hands. They had been conquered 50 years ago, and had burned with resentment ever since. The Sindathi representatives came next, speaking with the united voice of their partially restored hive mind. The Zitharians had shattered their collective consciousness during the invasion, but the fragments were slowly rebuilding. The Vosh appeared as beings of pure energy, contained within magnetic field projectors so they could interact with solid matter. They had waited centuries for someone to rally behind. Curtis found himself at the center of something he had never anticipated. Humanity had not sought to lead a galactic rebellion. They had simply defended their homes and helped their friends. But now dozens of species were looking to them for leadership, for hope, for a chance at freedom. The Admiral called a meeting of his senior staff and laid out the situation. They could send these aliens away and try to remain neutral, or they could embrace this moment and fight for something bigger than just human survival. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had been promoted and reassigned to Curtis's command staff after recovering from his wounds. He spoke up without hesitation. The Zitharians had proven they would not leave humanity alone. They had attacked Kestrel, they had attacked Liberty Station, and they would keep attacking until humans either surrendered or were destroyed. Helping these other species was not just the right thing to do morally, it was also the smart thing to do strategically. United, they had a chance. Divided, the Empire would crush them one by one. Curtis agreed. He authorized the formation of the Galactic Alliance, a coalition of free species dedicated to resisting Zitharian tyranny. The response from the Empire was swift and predictable. Admiral Krethzar brought his concerns to the High Council, the ancient beings who had ruled the Zitharian Empire since its founding. Krethzar expected the Council to authorize overwhelming force to send every available warship to crush this rebellion before it could grow. Instead, the High Council surprised him with a different approach. The first counselor commanded that Krethzar would offer the humans terms. Humanity could keep their independence and their territory. In exchange, they would cease their alliance with the rebel species and remain neutral. The Empire would leave them alone if they left the Empire alone. Krethzar's mandibles clicked in disbelief. They were going to negotiate with prey. The first counselor's response was cold and practical. The Empire was vast but not infinite. If the humans wanted to be left alone, that could be arranged. Without their symbol to rally behind, the rebels would fall apart. But the High Council had made a critical miscalculation. They assumed humans would choose survival over principle. They assumed humans would abandon allies to save themselves. They did not understand that human history was full of small nations standing against empires, of people choosing freedom over safety, of principles that were worth dying for. When the Zitharian offer arrived, Curtis read it carefully and then shared it with the Alliance leadership. The meeting included representatives from 20 different species, each one bringing their own perspective and hopes. The Talarian ambassador asked Curtis what humanity would do. The Krell warriors demanded to know if humans would betray them like the Sindathi had been betrayed before. The Vosh simply waited, their energy forms pulsing with barely contained anticipation. Curtis looked at each representative in turn, then gave his answer. Humanity did not abandon friends, not for promises, not for threats, not ever. Jake Morrison was assigned to draft the formal response. He spent an hour writing and rewriting, trying to find words that would convey humanity's position clearly. Finally, he deleted everything and wrote a single sentence. "We will accept your surrender when you are ready to give it." When Curtis read the draft, he smiled for the first time in weeks. It was perfect. It was defiant. It was exactly the message they needed to send. The response was transmitted to the Zitharian High Council through every available channel. Within hours, it had been intercepted and shared across the galaxy. On occupied worlds, people heard the human response and felt hope kindle in their hearts. In Zitharian command centers, officers read the message with shock and disbelief. The humans had rejected the Empire's generous offer. They had chosen war. Admiral Krethzar received orders to mobilize the full might of the Imperial fleet. The time for negotiation was over. The Empire would crush this rebellion completely, starting with the humans who had dared to defy them. Krethzar accepted the orders without comment, but privately he felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. The humans had beaten him twice now, and he did not understand how they did it. They were smaller, weaker, less advanced technologically. By every logical measure, they should be easy to defeat. Yet they kept winning. On New Terra, Curtis gathered the Alliance fleet and began preparing for the war he knew was coming. Ships from a dozen species assembled in orbit, each one contributing what they could to the common defense. The Talarians provided industrial capacity and supplies. The Krell sent warriors to serve as ground troops. The Sindathi shared their tactical coordination abilities. The Vosh offered their unique perspective on energy weapons and shield technology. And humans provided the one thing that had been missing from galactic warfare for 3,000 years: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. Jake stood on the observation deck of the command station and watched the fleet assemble. There were human destroyers and Talarian cruisers, Krell troop transports and Vosh energy ships, Sindathi scout vessels, and dozens of other designs from species he was still learning about. It was not the largest fleet in the galaxy. The Zitharians still had hundreds of ships to their few dozen. But it was something the galaxy had never seen before. Free people, standing together, refusing to kneel. Jake thought about that first. Battle at Kestrel, when the Defiance had been so outnumbered. He had been terrified then, certain they would die. Now he just felt determined. The Zitharians wanted a war, they were going to get one. The war that followed would be remembered in galactic history as the Uprising, but those who fought in it simply called it the bloodiest conflict anyone had ever seen. The Zitharian Empire threw its full military might against the Alliance, determined to crush the rebellion before it could spread further. But the Alliance fought back with a desperation born of knowing they had no choice. Surrender meant slavery or death, so they fought with everything they had. Captain Alex Murphy commanded the carrier group defending the Sindathi home system when the Zitharians launched their first major offensive. His flagship, the USS Independence, was surrounded by 30 Alliance ships facing 3 full Zitharian fleets. The odds were impossibly bad, and Murphy's orders from Curtis were simple. Hold long enough for the civilian evacuations to complete, then retreat if necessary. But Murphy looked at the Sindathi around him, these beings who were trying to rebuild their broken hive mind, and made a different decision. The Battle of Crimson Nebula lasted 6 days. Murphy used every trick in the human tactical manual and invented several new ones. He positioned his ships inside the nebula itself, using the dense gas clouds to hide from Zitharian sensors. He set traps, laid mines, and conducted hit-and-run attacks that kept the enemy off balance. When the Zetharians adapted to his tactics, he changed them. When they tried to bypass his fleet and reach the planet directly, he threw his ships into their path with suicidal determination. On the fourth day, the Independence took a direct hit from a Zetharian battleship that tore through her engineering section and killed most of the crew. Murphy was thrown across the bridge, his ribs broken and blood running down his face. The ship was dying, her reactor critical and life support failing, but Murphy refused to abandon his post. He ordered the surviving crew to transfer to the damaged cruiser Destiny and kept fighting. The Independence exploded 3 hours later, taking 2 Zetharian destroyers with her when her reactor finally went critical. Major Sarah Brooks led a ground force defending Sindathi Prime when Zetharian shock troops landed on the planet's surface. She had 3,000 human marines and 20,000 Sindathi warriors facing a force 10 times that size. The battle turned into a brutal siege that lasted 3 months. Brooks established a defensive line around the capital city and held it through wave after wave of Zetharian attacks. When ammunition ran low, her troops used captured Zetharian weapons. When those ran out, they fought hand-to-hand in the rubble-strewn streets. Sarah had grown up hearing stories about Earth's ancient wars, about soldiers who held impossible positions because retreat meant innocent people would die. Now she understood what those soldiers had felt. Every meter of ground the Zetharians took meant more Sindathi civilians killed. Every day the Marines held the line meant more families evacuated to safety. So they held, even when it seemed impossible. The Sindathi hive mind, inspired by human stubbornness, pulled itself back together during those 3 months and joined the fight with renewed strength. Commander Jack Foster was assigned to work with the Krell warriors after they joined the Alliance. The Krell were savage fighters who lived for combat, but their tactics were primitive. They charged straight at enemies with no coordination, relying on individual strength and rage to win. Jack had fought against berserkers before and knew they were dangerous but ineffective against disciplined troops. He began teaching the Krell something they had never known: patience, planning. The idea that rage could be directed instead of just unleashed. The Krell uprising shocked the Zetharian Empire. 4 occupied Krell worlds rose in coordinated rebellion, their timing perfect and their tactics sophisticated. The Krell warriors still fought with incredible ferocity, but now they fought smart. They ambushed supply convoys, destroyed communication hubs, and isolated Zetharian garrisons before overwhelming them. Within 2 weeks, the Krell had liberated their worlds and were looking for new battles to fight. Jack had given them the tools they needed to turn their rage into victory. Admiral Krethzar commanded the Zetharian forces and found himself fighting a war he could not understand. Every battle seemed won, then turned to defeat. Every victory proved hollow because the Alliance just kept coming. These species did not fight like civilized beings. They did not surrender when the odds were impossible. They did not retreat when logic demanded it. They fought with creativity and desperation, willing to sacrifice everything rather than accept defeat. And slowly, impossibly, they were winning. The turning point came at the Battle of the Azure Gate, a wormhole junction that allowed rapid movement across the galaxy. Admiral Curtis Blake led the Alliance fleet personally, knowing that victory here would cut the Zetharian Empire in half. He brought every ship the Alliance could spare, over 200 vessels from a dozen different species. The Zetharians met them with 300 warships, confident that their superior numbers would carry the day. The battle was brutal beyond anything the galaxy had seen. Ships died by the dozens in the first minutes as both fleets poured fire into each other at point-blank range. The space around the wormhole became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. Curtis commanded from the bridge of his flagship, the USS Liberty, and watched his tactical display with grim determination. They were taking terrible casualties, but the Zetharians were taking worse. The Alliance ships fought with a coordination the Empire could not match because they fought for something beyond orders and duty. When the Liberty took critical damage from a Zetharian dreadnought, a Talarian cruiser moved to shield her, sacrificing itself to buy time for repairs. When the Vosh energy beings began to fade from exhaustion after hours of continuous fighting, human medics shared their ship's power reserves to keep the Vosh alive. When Krell warriors boarded a Zetharian flagship in a desperate assault, human Marines were right beside them, covering their advance with precision fire. Admiral Krethzar watched from his command ship as his empire broke. He saw the coordination between species that should have been impossible. He saw ships sacrifice themselves for allies they had known for only months. He saw humans doing things that defied logic and survival instinct, all for abstract concepts like freedom and honor. The final message he sent to the High Council was simple. The humans were never the problem. The problem is that they make everyone else brave. The Zetharian line collapsed. Ships began to retreat without orders as their crews realized they were fighting for an empire that had lost its aura of invincibility. The Azure Gate fell to Alliance control, and with it went the Empire's ability to move forces quickly across the galaxy. Curtis did not pursue the retreating Zetharians. His fleet was battered, his ships damaged, and his crew exhausted. But they had won the battle that mattered. The war lasted 2 more years, but the outcome was decided that day. The Zetharian Empire faced rebellions on 100 worlds, all inspired by human defiance. Their fleets were stretched thin, their troops demoralized, and their leaders divided on how to proceed. Some wanted to fight to the bitter end, others argued for negotiation. The High Council finally accepted reality and sued for peace. The treaty was signed on New Terra in a newly built hall that would become the center of the Galactic Alliance. Representatives from 200 species gathered to witness the end of 3,000 years of Zetharian domination. The Empire agreed to grant independence to all their former subjects, pay reparations for the damage they had caused, and reduce their military to defensive forces only. It was a humiliating surrender for a power that had never known defeat. But the alternative was total destruction. Admiral Curtis Blake stood before the assembly and felt the weight of everything they had accomplished. He was exhausted. They had all lost friends and loved ones. The cost in blood and treasure had been staggering, but they had won something precious. They had won freedom for billions of beings across the galaxy. Curtis spoke to the gathered representatives, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall and beyond to ships listening throughout the system. He told them about a human saying, "Freedom is not free. It is earned with blood, sacrifice, and the willingness to stand up when standing is hard." Humanity had stood. All the Alliance species had stood with them. Together, they had proven that no empire, no matter how ancient or powerful, could stand forever against the united will of free beings. The hall erupted in cheers that could be heard across the station. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood at the back of the hall and smiled. He thought about that first battle at Outpost Kestrel, when the Defiance had been so hopelessly outgunned that survival seemed impossible. He thought about Liberty Station and the Crimson Nebula and all the battles that had followed. He thought about the friends he had lost and the allies he had gained. Most of all, he thought about Admiral Krethzar's laughter so long ago, when humanity had been dismissed as nothing but a legend. The Admiral had been right about one thing. Humans were legendary. He had just been wrong about why. Humans were legendary not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced than other species. They were legendary because they refused to accept that some things were impossible. They were legendary because they fought for principles even when fighting meant dying.